My name is Gabe Woolley. I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm a teacher, a son, a brother, and an uncle. In 2018, my nephew, Elijah Woolley, at 14 months old, died unexpectedly in his crib. The Wagoner County officials descended upon the home of my parents in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and a story of an unexpected death from sudden infant death syndrome was taken and spun as a murder and child sexual abuse by Wagoner County officials. As a result, Clayton Woolley, at 5 years old, was taken from his home and never returned. This is a story of a justice system operating under the guise of guilty until proven innocent. This is a story of injustice, a lack of accountability. The purpose of this podcast is to raise awareness, hold accountability, and it is a call to action for citizens of Oklahoma and the United States for checks and balances in our systems. This is the Rescue Clayton podcast. All right, well, we are back here with the Rescue Clayton podcast in Tulsa, Oklahoma, with more of the Woolley story. And again, we always want to make sure this is a research-based podcast. And so we want to bring on professionals and their experience and people who have been in Oklahoma for a long time and have observed systems. And so we are here with John Stitt, Governor Kevin Stitt's father, and then John Stitt is also a pastor here in Oklahoma. And he's gotten to know the Woolleys for some years, and he's a friend of the Woolleys, and he's gotten to know great details of the story and attest to their character. And we are also here with Steve Money. Steve Money is Bill and Lisa Woolley's lawyer, one of the many that we've had. Yeah. And so I'm going to have you guys introduce yourself. Again, you can say what you do, give background, and just tell us who you are, and then how you relate to the Rescue Clayton story. So, John, go ahead.
Well, as you said, I'm a retired pastor of Riverside Church. I was pastor there, senior pastor for 30 years. I have 3 sons. Keith is a lawyer here in town, and then, of course, Kevin, the governor, and then my youngest son, Kent. He works for Gateway Bank, and I'm also a grandfather to 10 grandchildren. And I'll just say this, it's one thing raising your kids, but the earth shifts when you're grandparents. And that's what makes this so personal, because I put myself in the Woolleys' position. This is their grandson.
Right.
Both of them are their grandchildren. And so I retired, I moved to the ranch, and my dad was a veterinarian. I grew up around livestock, and I like the cowboy way of life. And I married a wonderful Christian woman, and we just had a fabulous life. But I want to give back to the community, even though that I'm retired now. And I've never witnessed anything in my 78 years on this earth that is more tragic than what has happened to Bill and Lisa Woolley.
John, how do you sort of tie into the Rescue Clayton story?
Well, I have a friend that pastors in Texas, Conroe, Texas. We went to Bible college together. And about 4 years ago, he called me. We keep in touch sometimes. And he said, John, he said, there's a situation going on in Oklahoma. And he said, I just got off the phone talking to a former pastor of Bill and Lisa. And I forget his name or where he was from, but
Daniel Wormuth?
That sounds familiar,
Yeah.
Yes. And so my first, when they told me about it, I was in disbelief. I said, this couldn't be happening. There's got to be, where there's smoke, there's fire. Mm-hmm. And so I approached this very skeptical. But once I got to meet Bill and Lisa and saw the evidence, it's a tragedy. And I would want people fighting for me if I was in a situation like that with my grandchildren, and because I can feel their pain. And so that's how I got to know them. I called them up and got involved, and I've been involved for 4 years now.
Yeah, and we're very grateful that you have been.
Thank you.
Steve, so tell us about who you are and how you relate to the Rescue Clayton story.
Well, first of all, I want to comment on Mr. Stitt's conversation about grandkids. You know, there's an old bumper sticker that says, if I knew grandkids were so fun, I would have had them first. You know? So
Right.
There's a lot of truth to that, because I've got 3 grandkids.
Yeah.
So my involvement started probably about 3 years ago when the Woolleys were still in the middle of the criminal stuff. And so they came and we talked, but the fact is they had a really outstanding lawyer then, and I told them I don't think I can do any better than that lawyer's doing, so I would recommend that you stay there so you have all the continuity. They already know everything, and a new guy doesn't have to relearn everything. And kind of lost track of it after that. And then when the criminal stuff was over, they came back in and talked to me about what had happened, and I was like, holy cow, I mean, that was like a bad movie. And the more I dug into it, I was like, this is truly unbelievable.
Right.
I mean, they make movies about this stuff.
Yeah. And to be clear, for people, in case they tune in on this episode first, Mom and Dad, Bill and Lisa Woolley, were accused of the murder and child sexual abuse of their grandson Elijah, who passed away at 14 months old. Our belief is from SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. And then DHS removed Glory at 17 and Clayton at 5 years old from their custody. And the prosecution out of Wagoner County, Oklahoma has since still been, I say it's persecution. There is even reason to believe that my family's Christian faith has played a role in how the prosecution has viewed us, and that's on record. And so that's my take on it. But just to be clear about the charges of Bill and Lisa Woolley out of Wagoner County, again, murder and child sexual abuse with no evidence. And almost to an extent, I've heard theories of fabricated evidence. And again, that's what I've heard with my family and some people's concerns. Of course, we've been in and out of court to make things more official and have come across some wrongdoings or careless work that has been done in that system. But just to bring people in on specifically what those charges are. So you were talking about how it sounded so crazy, the accusations and.
Well, looking back on it now, you go, well, they filed charges on them for, child abuse and things like that, and then that wasn't flying that well, so let's just charge them with first-degree murder.
Right.
And that's what they did, and your parents were, as you well know, locked up, and they're being totally trashed in the media, and I mean, they were public enemy number one.
Right.
And I don't know how you get over that.
Yeah.
I mean, they were, holy moly, I mean, they were just trashed beyond belief. And, but even at that, I'm going to say, when you're doing an investigation and you have whatever you have in front of you, you don't know what you're going to get later, but whatever you have right now, that's what you got to go on.
Right.
And at a certain point in time, I'll even give the government the benefit of the doubt on that. But then there comes a time when it's, you have 5 expert doctors, one of which is typically a state witness, the most qualified physician in Oklahoma that deals with these kinds of things. And he's telling the prosecution, this child, not only was he not murdered, he wasn't even abused. The Woolleys took great care of these kids.
Right.
And the letter from that doctor goes into a fair amount of detail of how well your parents took care of Clayton and Elijah both.
Also last month, Tulsa doctor, that's Robert Block, a widely respected expert on child abuse and child death, said he saw no evidence of child abuse or neglect. He went on to say, I disagree with the medical examiner's conclusion, as there is no evidence to support a conclusion of homicide. But at the same time, he found there was evidence that the Woolleys, in his words, went to extremes to make sure Elijah was well taken care of. It was Dr. Block's letter that really tipped the scales in this case.
So that's where this gets messy. Once you know, you know. When you know better, do better. Well, the prosecution knew better. They didn't do better.
And then, John, you met the Woolleys, Bill and Lisa Woolley in particular, some years ago. From then, when you met them up until now, how much time would you say that you spend with Bill and Lisa Woolley and have gotten to know them?
Oh, I think we are in contact several times a week.
Yeah.
I might go a week or so without it, and then every day. I mean, we consult with each other every day.
Right. So you would say, would that mean that you really feel like you've gotten to get a vision and an idea of their character and who they just are as people?
Oh, absolutely. If I've pastored hundreds and hundreds of people. I've pastored 4 different churches in my career in Alabama and Oklahoma. And the last church was 30 years in Norman, Oklahoma. And I would say of all the different people that I've pastored and those that I've interacted with, I would put Bill and Lisa Woolley in the top 10% of what Christianity is with skin on it. They are genuine, they're godly people. They love God, they love their country, and they're the type of people, if I was going out of town, I would love to leave my kids with somebody like Bill and Lisa.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, how much time would you say that you spend with the Woolleys? And
So I almost started laughing when you said that, because I'm like, I love your parents. It's hard not to communicate with Lisa because she won't let many days go by when she's not reaching out to you. So I'm probably not as much as Mr. Stitt, but it is several times per week.
Yeah. And how do you feel they are as an individual, or some characteristics and qualities of Bill and Lisa that you have gotten to know?
Well, I think I couldn't agree more with Mr. Stitt. It's like if I needed somebody to take care of, if I had little kids or grandkids, I'd be glad to put them with your parents. I mean, they are cream of the crop, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Plus, they have all those dogs out there. So.
Right. What do you feel has, for Clayton's situation, because we know this podcast is a pursuit of justice for Clayton, the Rescue Clayton podcast, as we call it. This course, and so how it's been for Clayton, how would you sort of highlight the major aspects and impacts of this situation as they pertain to Clayton, and how it's been, as much as we can know, and we can't know because we're not with him, but from Clayton's perspective, what do you feel some potential concerns you could have for a child in this situation? In and out of homes, shifting environments, different schools.
Well, again, this kind of comes back to DHS, because the falsity of their philosophy, or the untruthfulness of what they say, is that they're always worried about trauma on the child. I've almost grown to dislike that word trauma, because everything out of their mouth is trauma. Well, I think trauma is keeping a child away from their family. I was in court the other day, and this lady's fighting some custody stuff, and well, I don't think he should see the kids unless, there's some reunification therapy. She had withheld the kid for 1.5 years. I said, let me ask you this. So if your child got kidnapped, and for 2 years you didn't see that child, and the FBI shows up one day and goes, here's your child, are you telling the court that you're going to say, no, I can't take that child until I've had reunification therapy?
Right.
Come on. You're going to grab that child, and you know what? And this is what DHS doesn't believe. They don't believe the child will hang on to mom. It's just like children are morons, according to DHS. I've seen it time after time. When a kid hadn't seen a parent for a while, they run up to them and they hug them and they love them because they've missed them.
Right.
Clayton,
Absolutely.
Your parents had this child for the first 4.5, 5 years of his life. They haven't seen him for the second 4.5 or 5 years of his life. Literally no contact, not a postcard, not a carrier pigeon, nothing. So what must Clayton be feeling like?
Right.
What happened? He literally goes to school one day and never saw his family again.
Right.
I mean, how does that not impact? If you're worried about trauma on a child, don't do that to the child.
And I think of that as a teacher, switching schools, different environment, and I can't help but think, now I look at things differently now that I'm an educator and a teacher and I've been through this experience with my family. I can't be so quick to make assumptions in my mind if I have a student that's in the system in DHS, and I do my best to, remain neutral, but I have empathy for that child or that situation or that family, because I could, for all I know, when I get a student enrolled in my classroom and they've been displaced from their home from DHS, for all I know, how do I know that they were supposed to be, rightfully so,
That's right.
It's an interesting thing to think about, how the experience ultimately can develop some empathy for you and open your eyes to the experience being looked at differently.
What I don't understand is there's evidence that Clayton has tried to run away, and he's met some kid in the neighborhood and he's told him, I'm going to kill myself. He hides under cars and they have the police come and get him.
Right.
And he says he's locked in his room. Why does that fall on deaf ears?
Yeah, from my perspective, it doesn't seem like that's a convenient argument for the prosecution, and it's being ignored. I haven't heard anything done about it. So,
well, and, in the documentary, the audio of that,
right,
of one of the neighbors calling about it,
yep,
that's in the documentary. That's why I say we're not making this stuff up.
yeah.
So the real question becomes, how come Judge Brown doesn't care about that?
Right.
How come the district attorney doesn't care about that?
Yeah, and you're right. When you watch there is the documentary Saving Clayton by Red River TV and Project 46 out of Oklahoma City, and we encourage people to go to savingclayton.com and watch that documentary. Janelle Batts, Kevin Batts, and Miles have done really excellent work with that documentary. You two are actually featured in that documentary, giving your opinion, your expertise, your observations with the Woolley family too. So we definitely want this podcast to be something that complements the documentary and perhaps covers some things the documentary doesn't cover. But I think that interesting question, John, from your perspective and what you've heard and what you've experienced. Ultimately, Clayton's situation right now, where he is today, what do you feel is the cause of that, has caused that, for him to be where he is now, living the situation he is living in now?
Well, you have to go back to the beginning, and I think everybody, if they hear that a child has been raped, that a child's been murdered, or little brother's been murdered, and the parents did it, everybody's going to rush in there and want to rescue that child.
Right.
That's a normal response. But then after the child has been kidnapped and you begin to investigate and the truth comes out, the evidence comes out and exonerates the parents, then there should have been an immediate change. And I think that from the Wagoner County, the sheriff's office, to the district attorney, to the DHS, I think that they operated under a false assumption, and now it's like my sister being the prosecutor. They don't want to admit they were wrong.
Right.
And they're covering evidence and they're doing more damage, and just to prove a point that
Right.
they're never wrong.
Right.
And I think that's the cause. That I can understand in the beginning why there was a rush to judgment, but I don't understand when the rush to judgment has been debunked and the evidence is overwhelming that there was nothing done wrong. And the only place, you asked about the damage, the only thing that's going to make Clayton have a normal life, if he gets under the jurisdiction of godly parents like Bill and Lisa that will pray with him and teach him the Word of God and teach him, because only the love of God and the power of Jesus Christ can right the wrong in his life. If not, he'll be a damaged human for the rest of his life.
And even beyond that, and what mom and dad can do, I myself, Desiree and Glory, like he has a church community, he has a community of people that have always supported him as he was in our custody, and now when he's not, and will be there for him. And like we were just talking about, an environment, we are psychological human beings. We feed off of the sociology and psychology around us and in our brains and in our social settings, and we'll adapt to it. And that's why there's something to be said about whether you're a religious person or not. When a family or a group of people have some sort of identity and some sort of religion and culture to it, statistically speaking, their children are more successful academically and socially because they've had a foundation and an identity that has been fostered around them. In the Christian faith, even in other religions, they had some sort of structure built around them, and those children, statistically speaking, are more successful. And to our extent, to our knowledge, as far as we know, Clayton currently isn't experiencing that anymore.
Well, I was going to say, because your parents had them in church, had both boys in church, and that's how they were growing up, church activities,
Right.
A lot. And you're right, to the best of our information is, the guardian now doesn't do that.
Yeah.
What I find amazing is that I've been told by the experts that a child that age should never be interviewed more than one time.
Yeah.
And if it's another time, no more than twice, but by the same interviewer. But Clayton was interviewed by the DHS appointed counselor, and he didn't even know his brother was dead. And he came through and exonerated his grandparents. Nothing bad happens at our house.
Yeah, Clayton's...
Everybody is happy. He said, the only thing that I'm afraid of is rattlesnakes.
Right. Clayton's testimony, when he was questioned, totally debunked everything the prosecution was trying to pin down for. But that was ignored. And my stance and my reason to believe, having known Clayton and actually helped raise him, it appears from what I've observed that transcripts appear to even be fabricated or tampered with because they're typed out in a manner that Clayton doesn't even speak in.
Yes.
And where's the accountability for something like that? And of course, our voice, when we voice that, falls on deaf ears because we don't hold the platform that the prosecution holds, and the court leans in favor of the prosecution.
Courts are pretty much a rubber stamp for DHS.
Right. Can you speak a little bit, Steve, to the fact and the idea that courts generally lean in favor of the prosecution and why that is?
Because all parents are liars, all men are molesters. I had somebody that works at a place in Muskogee that does these so-called forensic interviews.
Right.
And she said, look, 98% of the people that are accused are guilty. So what chance do you have walking in? And I think judges, for the most part, certainly not all of them, but a lot of them, it's just whatever DHS says, that's it. To the point that as these cases go along, frequently, and I see this a lot, the judge will say, well, they can have visitation, we're going to leave it to the discretion of the DHS.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, well,
There very much is just this trust the professionals. Well, if the DA said this, or DHS said this, or the investigator, whoever holds this badge, or this title, or this status, or even this degree, then we're just going to blindly go with what they said. As if humans no longer are capable of making mistakes, or sinning, or wrongdoings now that they've earned their title.
I understand.
It's not logical.
That's the way the system is, but in this case, experts
Right.
in their field,
Right.
medically documented pediatric pathologists have come in and proved beyond a shadow of a doubt. That's why they're not in jail, because they've done nothing wrong.
Exactly, yeah.
And I don't understand how the DHS can continue to ignore
Right.
the evidence.
And that's something to speak on too. If Clayton was taken because of the charges, and then charges were dropped in 2021, I'm curious, how legally can DHS even keep him away?
well, that comes back to Judge Brown again, because again, reading some transcripts, she addressed that, and she said, look, we don't have the same standard of proof as is required in a criminal court. Okay, well, that's fine. But had the criminal charges not been filed, would Clayton have been taken away automatically, or these boys taken away?
Right.
No,
It's
the
cause
answer is no.
cause and effect. One happened because of the other. And if one is now gone, how can you stand on any argument to keep Clayton away?
You know, if it hadn't turned out the way that it did with that death, you wouldn't find a soul that would say that your parents neglected those boys, deprived those boys, abused those boys, and those are kind of the standards for DHS purposes. And again, I want to be real clear about this. It's not that there's not enough evidence to go forward. There's no evidence that a
Exactly.
crime was committed.
Yeah,
And
there is no
there's a big
evidence.
difference. So the evidence is quite the contrary.
And the biggest thing that they were standing on at one point was apparently Clayton's testimony, which that doesn't even stand up. I mean, I've seen the transcripts of what they claimed he said. He doesn't even speak in that lingo, and in that those sort of like just the way that were transcript on the transcript that he was saying, he doesn't call my father, his grandfather, William,
Yeah.
which the transcripts said Clayton refers to him as William. I have never even called my dad William. My mom, who's been married to him for 30 years, doesn't call him William. Where did Clayton hear the word William all of a sudden? It's dad's legal name, and the courts, they probably saw that on the documents. I mean, they really shot themselves in the foot with that, it seems like, but of course, there's no accountability for it.
Well, you know, Mr. Stitt, when you're talking about multiple interviews, I was thinking, no, that was multiple coaching sessions.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's all that was.
Well, they hid the first one that exonerated the
No,
bullies. They didn't
that's
even
right.
let that come into the court
Right, yeah, that was withheld from the defense.
intentionally.
Intentionally. I don't know how that's legal.
That document, by the way, is in the documentary also.
Yeah,
So that's why I say we're not making this stuff up.
absolutely. This is all documented. Saving Clayton documentary shows it. We put these visuals on the podcast as well. It's sort of a documentary type format, and so, John, you were just kind of leaning into the idea of the fact that the prosecution withheld evidence for the defense for over a year. What was your understanding of that?
Well, that's criminal in itself. I mean, how can they get away with that? Because if that had been presented, there's nobody that would. He had no reason to lie. He didn't even know his little brother was dead at that time. He was at school, and he's taken in for an interview, and it's just as open as anyone could expect.
Right.
So I don't have an answer.
Yeah.
At a time before he had an opportunity to be coached.
Clayton, Clayton.
Clayton, yeah.
There's a reason to believe he may have been coached, or could have been coached if he were to have said those things. I don't believe he ever even said those things.
Didn't he have 6 interviews within 24 hours?
Right. He was
Six interviews.
rushed out and interviewed back to back to some extent. I mean,
And that same nurse, they had the equipment there to record, and I watched the first forensic interview, and I thought they were even asking leading questions, like talking about, has Papa ever touched your bottom, your private, or anything? Yes. And they said, well, what was he doing? Well, he was giving me a bath.
Yeah.
He was washing me.
Right.
Well, if you've ever cleaned a kid, you know, you're going to clean their butt because they go to the bathroom.
Right. And that was definitely twisted to be in their favor very blatantly. But any parent, anyone who cares for children or takes care of children, when they hear the whole story, it's just a no-brainer. It's obvious what that is. I mean, bathing your child. What do you bathe your child fully clothed and not clean their whole body? It's not logical, but it just shows that when someone has a motive and a bias at work, I mean, anything can be twisted to take out of context.
There's a concept called confirmation bias, and it is you've already come to the conclusion, so everything you do, you just do to confirm what your opinion already was.
And that's what I believe the investigator out of Wagoner has done, and then the DA and the sheriff have followed his lead on that. And DHS, everyone is just passing it off to the next professional and just trusting the professionals and not asking for both sides of the story, as our legal system should be doing.
I don't know if it's the right word, but there's been a collusion between the DHS and the court system in Wagoner County. Absolutely. It seems like they get together and we're all going to say the same thing.
It does appear that way.
It does.
We have reason to believe that. It's, you know, it all seems very convenient, you know, in their favor. And at the end of the day, when you think about how it works, unfortunately, when you're an individual or a family, it's you, your word, and the money that you have against the state's money, the state's word, and all the funding that the state of Oklahoma, or whatever your state is, has to defend yourself. And like we were saying with Desiree, it really seems like an attempt to kind of just bleed her dry until she fails. That seems like the hope of the prosecution. But I kind of want to talk a little bit about, specifically in each of your roles, what action steps have you taken in efforts to help rescue Clayton? So go ahead.
From the legal side, myself, Steve Gray, and Gary Richardson, we have sued the Wagoner County Sheriff's Office and Danny Elliott personally. And I don't want to skip over Danny Elliott.
Danny Elliott is the sheriff.
He's the lead investigator.
Oh, so Danny Elliott is the lead investigator out of Wagoner County, and you have helped the Woolleys sue him. So there is there is currently a lawsuit against
in federal court. So and kind of the basis for that is, again, like Mr. Stitt said, before he got there, he said he was going to investigate a murder.
Right.
We have a transcript where he testified in court that there's no such thing as SIDS. In fact, his exact words is, that's a fictitious diagnosis.
Sudden infant death syndrome.
Yes. Right. And then, of course, and that's in the documentary, and then also the interrogation video.
Yep.
I think it was your dad maybe he was talking to, and he goes, yeah, there's no such thing as sudden infant death. And now I know he's given a deposition since then, and he tried to qualify that. He goes, well, it was context. Mm-hmm. Well, what context is there? You said that it doesn't apply.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And John, just kind of speaking to what extent and actions have you taken ultimately the effort to rescue Clayton through the Woolleys, your interactions with the Woolley family?
Well, I've first of all, I've tried to comfort and be a spiritual help to them. I've prayed with them. I've encouraged them. I've put them in contact with people. I remember taking several people to the governor's legal counsel, Mark Burgett, who was legal counsel the first 2 years of Kevin's term. He used to be on my board of directors at Riverside Church, and I knew he was a fair and a godly man. And I took all the evidence, but he was on his way out. I contacted John O'Connor, who replaced him, who became I take that back. John O'Connor replaced the former Attorney General. And I got with John O'Connor and Shay Rossi with Fox News, And I've done everything I can.
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
stayed and have worked with him. And I said, whatever I can do to help them, whether it's financially or whatever, I said, I'm on board.
And that connection to Fox 23 has been great, because Fox 23 has been following the story since 2018, since it started.
Yes.
Clay Loney was really a large voice for this, and he was digging into both sides. And then as he moved on to other things, that Shay Rossi picked up the baton and has been a great champion so far.
And I want to talk about how fair they've been, at least in my experience, and I think overall. Right. We were in court a couple of weeks ago because we've also sued the guardian because she ought to release the kid, basically.
Right.
And so some issues came up, and I will tell you, Shay Rossi asked me tough questions too.
Yeah,
I mean,
she's fair.
I don't ever get a pass. You know?
Yeah.
She scares me sometimes.
Yeah.
So I mean, Fox 23. I mean, can't thank them enough.
Right.
Because they have been fair right down the line. That's
absolutely
great.
And so what was interesting is when I became an Oklahoma GOP delegate, I actually had an interaction with the Wagoner County DA, and I asked him face to face for a second time. I told him I'm an elementary school teacher, I'm Clayton's biological uncle, and I want you to help me get custody of Clayton. And his response essentially was that there was anything he could or would do about it. And I'm just curious, what have your interactions been, John, with the prosecution, if any, to what extent, and your sense about what's going on with that relationship?
Well, I finally, excuse me, I made an appointment and went and talked to the district attorney, Jack Thorpe. And he said, I've been expecting you. And so I said, okay. And he had somebody else in the office with him. Mm-hmm. And I said, before we get into this, I want to ask you a question, Jack. I said, do you believe, like I do, that in America, a person is innocent until proven guilty? He said, yes, I do. I practice that all the time. And so then when I brought up, why can't you release Clayton back to his mother according to the 10A rules? Right. She qualifies. And then he comes back and says, well, just because we don't have enough evidence to convict them doesn't mean they're not guilty. I said, Jack, I just told you, you proved my point.
Right.
And I don't understand. So I think there's bias from the very beginning from the sheriff. I think there's bias from Jack Thorpe, and there's certainly bias from the
investigator.
The investigator and the Department of Human Services.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so whatever it takes. Lawsuits, whatever. I just don't understand, but I appreciate what you're doing, because I think that the people are beginning to understand. There's beginning to be a public awareness, and there's more and more pressure going to be put on Wagoner County and also DHS, and that's the intent.
Right, and it wasn't until Fox 23 started covering our story and citizens started speaking out that mom and dad were released from jail and charges were dropped. And I don't believe that it will be until the citizens start speaking up that Clayton comes home. And I think there is a role where the citizens hold the government accountable.
Yes.
Because the government is still made up of human beings capable of bias and mistakes. So who holds them accountable? They hold the people accountable, but where is the other side of the scale? And so, Steve, tell us a little bit about what would you find worth noting about your interactions with the prosecution and your sense of things?
Well, I'll tell you, this is what makes this kind of tough, because I've never had a bad interaction with the district attorney there.
Yeah.
Just never have. Consider him a friend. I mean, there's just never been a conflict between he and I.
Right.
Some of the assistants, some of them I didn't know at the time, but the ones that I do know, never had a bad experience.
Yeah.
And so that's what makes this kind of difficult, because, you know, they get criticized by some people, the prosecutors, just routinely. But I'm just going to go off my experience. I've never had a bad experience with them. And I go back to go, you know, when they arrest somebody and they go, well, it's not personal, just doing my job.
Right.
Well, it seems pretty personal if you're the one in jail, you know, and they ignore their own expert, basically. You know, I don't know how you deal with that. So this is kind of difficult. I don't take any joy in saying some of the things I'm saying, but they're true. What I'm saying is true. Yeah. And again, the district attorney and the judge both could terminate that 10A guardianship this week, next week.
Right.
They could do it.
And they choose not to.
And it's a choice.
Yeah.
So if somebody's going to say, oh, I can't.
Right.
That's wrong.
And what's unfortunate is that the DA, when asked by delegates and simply citizens that he represents, that he's elected to, he flat out paints the picture and tells them that no, we can't. So we have elected officials lying. It's nothing new that politicians lie, but we have the elected officials lying straight to our face to delegates and to citizens right there when blatantly, flat out asked, what is he going to do about this? Well, his response to that is that he can't speak to juvenile case or situations, and I don't know, but he's not in DHS custody anymore. So
well, he can't talk about the case,
right.
but he can darn sure talk about the statute allows him to do it. In fact, he's one of only 3 that can.
Right. So when I asked the DA to help me get custody of my nephew Clayton, he says first I can't talk about juvenile situations or the case or anything like that. What would your response to that be?
He's wrong.
Why is that?
Because the statute specifically says he can.
He can. The DA can comment on the situation. And to be clear, Clayton is not in DHS custody. He's not a ward of the state. He's in a guardianship.
Well, that's right, but they've kept it under what we call the JD case number. That was the old DHS case number.
Right.
And that's how that guardianship gets reviewed. I don't know that no, I do know. It doesn't have to be in that JD case number. That could probably be transferred within the system where somebody besides Judge Brown could hear.
Yeah.
And I want to say this, I'm not a lawyer, but they put pressure on Desiree to give up her rights as her guardianship.
Without her lawyer present, my understanding.
And finally, after they just kept saying this is what's best for Clayton, she agreed, but she had 10 days to turn her decision around. And so the next day, within 24 hours, after she talked to real people that knew what was best for Clayton, she went back and said, I want to renege on that decision. I don't want to give up my rights as a mother. And the legal system, she's supposed to have that right, and they've never addressed it. Her attorney has made it.
That is a tremendous point.
That is. The law hasn't done what it was supposed to do and address that.
So Desiree goes in, is coerced sort of to sign her rights away, cornered, I think without a lawyer, my understanding at that time, intimidated. And then she does, but within 24 hours, she turns around and tries to take it back. And there is a statute that says she has 10 days to do that.
Yes.
And she was denied that right.
That was a point that's got to be made. That's a holy cow, that's important.
And then also, Bill and Lisa got guardianship under Judge Shook, I believe was his name. Yep. And they put so much pressure on them. Bill finally gave in. They said it'd be better, so he gave up his guardianship, but Lisa never did. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how that she can't have custody of the child because she never gave up her guardianship. And I have never seen any document that they take it away from her.
And speaking of documents, there's not even a document saying, we have not been served anything saying that we're not allowed to have contact with Clayton. There is not, I have never been served.
Right.
So, recently the Woolleys have been in court. So what's the most recent update with this situation with Clayton, situation with Desiree's, Bill and Lisa's, and the current guardian of Clayton?
Okay, so we sued the guardian saying that she conspired with the district attorney's office, she conspired with DHS, and she conspired with Judge Brown, intentional infliction of emotional distress and alienation of affection. And we got a judgment on that from the liability standpoint.
In our favor?
Damages, yes.
Yep.
That being a default judgment because she never responded to it, may be subject to attack. But as of now, her lawyers, which, by the way, the guardian has a job that probably does not pay all that much. And when she showed up in court on Monday, she had the most expensive law firm in the state of Oklahoma.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to zoom in on. When the guardian that currently has Clayton was served papers and given how many days to respond?
20.
And she did not do that. She chose not to do that. So now she's in court because she chose not to do that. She's being sued by Bill and Lisa Woolley and Desiree. And so she didn't respond in a timely manner. Now she comes back and shows up to court, and on her side she has one of the most expensive law firms in the state of Oklahoma.
Yes, to put it bluntly, yes.
And how is this individual affording this? Someone who works a simple 9-to-5 job.
That's the question.
Right.
That, inquiring minds want to know.
And we don't have any evidence of this now. This is most recently. This only happened a week ago. So we want to look into and figure out where the money and the funding is coming for one of these most expensive law firms for this guardian. I say it is currently abusive living situation Clayton has been placed into by DHS, and where the lawyers to fight against my family, fight against this guardian being sued, where's the funding coming from for that second most expensive law firm in the state of Oklahoma? Suddenly, this foster mother has all this money to afford such a thing.
So our hearing was on Monday, May the 1st. They got in on April the 27th. I mean, it's not like they've been in for a while, and
Right.
they got in a few days before court.
Yeah.
And then they showed up and they asked for the judgment to be vacated. That was denied. It doesn't mean they can't come back and attack it, because I'm sure they will. But if that was denied, we were actually in court to put on evidence as to the Wooley's damages, and because your parents have been out a boatload of money, lost jobs, going to be difficult to hire just because of the charges that they had.
Right.
How do you put a dollar amount on the emotional damage that's been done, and the health declination that your mother's gone through? I don't know. That's what we were there for. So they asked to pass that part, which was granted, and I disagree with the judge. I thought the judge did a great job. I think it's the first time since this case started in 5 years that the Woolleys have actually got to be represented in court in a manner that the judge listened to them.
Something in our favor for the first time.
First time in 5 years.
Yes. And so the way we want to kind of close out with this is, John, look in the camera as if you're talking to Clayton himself.
Is this the camera or that the camera?
Right here.
Okay.
And leave a message for Clayton that he'll see at the appropriate age and time.
Clayton, I just want you to know that your family love you very much. Your grandma and grandpa, your uncle, your aunt, everyone that's in their family has loved you. They're praying for you, and they are doing everything possible in their power to rescue you and bring you back to home where you belong. And I just want to encourage you, don't give up. We're praying, and just trust God, and in the end, I think it's going to work out good for you in the end.
And so, Steve, if you left a message for Clayton, speaking to him whenever he sees this, what would you tell Clayton?
It's hard to top that, what he said, but I would say, Clayton, you have no idea how much your family loves you. You have no idea how much they've been fighting tooth and toenail. They have done something that I really don't know anybody else has ever done or gotten accomplished, is to bring attention to how you've been mistreated and how your family's been mistreated. So I want to agree with Pastor Stitt. I know it's hard, but hang tough. Your family will be here when we win this thing. You will go home someday.
And so I thank you guys both, again, John Stitt and Steve Money, for being here on the Rest of Clayton podcast, and for bringing in your perspective, and for bringing in the opportunity to make this a research-based podcast, and for continuing to fight to help to rescue Clayton.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Uncle Gabe, you be staying at the house and eat pancakes with us in the daytime, and I love you.